Thank you so much for joining us on the Voice of Job Seekers. This is Mark, and if you want to know more about the podcast, feel free to go to voiceofjobseekers.com, press the send voicemail button, and you can leave a message right there because it activates your laptop microphone or your mobile phone. How about that? So if you want to also call, you can call it 708-365-9822. I'll also take a text there. You can also email me at mark@thevoiceofjobseekers.com. And again, thank you very much for joining us. So today, I am going to introduce to you Jeff Kavanaugh. He is the senior partner and head of recruiting at Infosys. It's a $9 billion global IT consulting firm. And in that capacity, he has met and meets with hundreds of grads every year. He teaches as an adjunct professor at the University of Texas. Well, welcome to the show, Jeff Kavanaugh. How are you, sir?
Excellent. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you. And most grads are unprepared for the critical thinking necessary in the job market. And I know that that's a part of what we're going to talk about, but I also want to talk about the recent study that you were involved with. And I believe that as well, we're going to try to link to the article that was in Fast Company recently of professionals that you sought out to see and purvey perhaps where the skills gap is or how is it manifesting itself.
Yes, we'll cover those things, I think, to support a few of the points. I think the main thing is to have a good time here and hopefully share a few actionable steps people can take to advance their own careers, and if they're looking for a job, to be able to secure the one that they're seeking.
Sure, absolutely. Now, in your contention, and I think it's true because other studies have also shown how critical thinking is missing from students when they're hired on. How about in their career planning? Where do you see where students are falling short and perhaps maybe where they can leverage some of their education or some of their student experience to grow in this area and to use it to show employers that they're able to use it effectively upon hiring?
I think first you need to stratify the population because that student, he or she who's a junior or senior and undergraduate versus someone getting their master's versus someone maybe coming back after a few years and getting their MBA, they're at different points in their career and different points in their life. So they probably have some accumulated skills and experiences and also some different perspectives. I think for the person that has not had that full-time job yet, hopefully there's been some work experience in the summers. The internship is the closest thing to the Willy Wonka golden ticket, I think,
right.
Because it's just so relevant that I wanted to emphasize that early on. It might be obvious for many colleges, especially for ones that have a good career services program. Whatever it takes, get out there, even if you work for free, have a relevant internship because you will learn, first of all, if that's the area you want to go into, and it will also give you something to talk about and a really credible data point for anyone that's considering hiring you. So that's important. And it will also help you understand what critical thinking and creative thinking and these skills are in the real world and beyond the textbooks and beyond the classes and the collaboration with your classmates. It's interesting because some of these skills, like critical thinking, that they're really hidden in plain sight. You're taught them in various forms since you get elementary school almost, even the structure of sentences, and some of it's rote, and eventually you get to where you have papers, and schools are doing a better and better job of this. But still, if you think about the business world as maybe not in real time, but having to shift and morph and churn pretty quickly to keep up with what the market's going, and yet these academic institutions, by nature, have a long-term view. Their curriculum, their approach, their methods have been developed over decades, in some cases, for the older ones, centuries. They pride themselves on that legacy. Well, it means it's hard to turn the ship around. And it means that they're often a few years behind what the market's demanding. So I think it is important to recognize that. It's good to have that longer term, maybe safe view in the academic world that you can test and learn and contemplate some things. At the same time, be able to develop your thinking to solve real business problems. I think that difference in time horizon is important. I also believe that critical thinking, when you demystify it, it's about using facts and developing or structuring your thinking, and then communicating your thinking in such a way that people can make sense of it. It's a very important point, because quite often, if people are fairly rigorous in their thinking, let's say they're an engineer or they're methodical, you use the scientific method, you use deductive logic. It's not a bad way to think. The problem is when you communicate that way, you're forcing someone to go through all the steps in your own logic, and you lose them pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. That's if you're lucky. If you're lucky, they hang on. But the problem is any weak link in the chain, and you lose them, either because their attention dissipates or because you don't hold the logic. And a better way of doing it, and I've got one of the articles on my site, I went into this fairly detailed, for fairly a lot of depth, is on the pyramid principle, using inductive logic to communicate your thinking. And it is a way to develop a lot of gravitas, talk about that in a little bit, and come across as a more senior person, because if you organize your thinking with inductive logic, where you state your conclusion first, and then you support it with between 3 and 5 points, and you continue to go deeper in those areas, you've made it so much easier for the listener, the employer, the recruiter, to listen and internalize all those great things about you. Otherwise, it's like if you want to buy a bicycle, you just dump the parts on the table and say, look at the bike. Now, they want the assembled bicycle. They want something they can actually use. And so that's an important point with critical thinking, is that you might think in a logical way or deductive way, communicate more inductively and state many of your points, and then support them. Don't build up to them. Otherwise, you're going to ask a lot of people for patience and to hang with you as you develop your story, which is difficult, especially in the interviews.
So really, if someone can't translate that to different types of people concerning what the audience or who the audience is, then it's going to be hard to connect with people who are interviewing you, or even just seeing if you're going to be a good fit for a position.
First principles are know your audience.
Right.
Is your audience a recruiter, that you are one of 10 people going through that cubicle or that little office on campus? Is it a small company where they're actually hoping that you join them, or you're one of the top people on their list? Mm-hmm. Is it a door you're trying to open for an internship, and you're just trying to wedge in somehow, or maybe cold call because there's a really good company that's growing and is desirable in your hometown where you're based, and you're just trying to go in? So know your audience, know how senior they are, know their tolerance for time, and do some research. It's almost a crime with all the tools we have not to do research before meeting someone. LinkedIn, a simple internet search, and then digging a little deeper to find what that person might have written, where they came from, their alumni networks, where they're from. And even if you don't know that person, you can do a lot of reverse engineering and be Sherlock Holmes, do a little sleuthing. Mm-hmm. Because first of all, if you just have 5 to 10 minutes of research about a person's company, you can frame your thinking, frame your thoughts in a way that's relevant for them. And plus, it shows some respect that you took the time to do that. As you mentioned in your intro, I interview dozens of people, look at hundreds and thousands of resumes each year, and it's amazing to me when people don't do that. It just shows that they don't care, or is that the kind of behavior I just picture? Would they do that on my consulting project? Would that be the way they prepared for a client? So it's important to do that, not just because of the real value it provides in your interview. It's also the perceived value that you're you're conveying to the person interviewing you. And you can have a lot of fun with that. Sure. Because when you start making connections, the phrases you're able to use, the adjectives, the stories and examples, they all just seem to be right. If a person has a sports background, or if they're from a certain area and that sports team, or if maybe they had an officer position in journalism, or perhaps in a fraternity, or all of a sudden you can picture that person and you can just start to identify with them. Even if that person believes things differently than you or has a different background, you can still empathize with them. And I think that's an important concept. And besides critical thinking, empathy and the ability to relate to people is huge. So I think that's a very important point, regardless of whether you're coming out of school or whether you are mid-career or you're switching jobs, that you're able to incorporate. And we're talking separately about the interview process itself, but it's also very effective when you're interviewing in someone's office and you're able to incorporate all those data points and things that you observe.
Yeah, time after time, those are the very points that are being made on the show and probably couldn't be made enough in all the blog posts and articles and videos that you see in interviewing, that the research kind of separates the worst, the good, and from the best. Is that somebody who's really showing qualification and showing that they're best qualified because they've done all the road work first, not assuming anything from who may be interviewing them. So the point very much well made. If there was something that could be changed about the way graduates go about, just kind of preparing themselves during their whole tenure, is not just waiting till their senior year or their junior year. Do you think that even maybe it should even start in their freshman year, and learn to keep their fingers on the pulse of what's going on in their prospective industries?
Absolutely. The question really becomes, what's important to you? Because if you're doing things that you dislike or you don't want to do at all, you probably won't stay with it.
Right.
So you have to come at it from a place where you can internalize that motivation and get into that flow. You can struggle through maybe getting out of bed to go do something or to write that report or to do the research when you don't want to, as long as there's a higher purpose. But over the long haul, you do need to connect to something that's important to you. I don't know if someone knows their industry as a freshman in college. If they do, God bless them. They're ahead of the pack, I guess. Right. I think what they can do, though, is say, I think there are 3 levels of competencies, and we'll address those. One of them is just this basic learnability, the ability to learn. It's a cliche to say learning is lifelong, you continuous learning. What I see and the need to reinvent, of course, I'm in the consulting world. I even see it, though, with clients every year. Some element of your offering, of your industry, of your company changes enough that it's noticeable if you don't keep up with it. It can be overwhelming. But take heart, because it's overwhelming for everybody. So the degree to which people can make sense of it, then they're ahead of the pack. So the ability to learn. I think the next level are these foundational competencies: critical thinking, creative thinking, oral communication, written communication, those types of things. They're the foundation. You can go back to Seneca and Aristotle and literally throughout recorded history, some of those fundamentals haven't changed. Now, how you communicate, especially as PowerPoint and even these podcasts and different elements come in, that has changed. But there's a whole series of foundational competencies that really everyone needs to be able to master. Then there are what I would call mastery competencies, the things that incorporate some skills that have really come into vogue and into popularity more recently: artificial intelligence and automation, design thinking, agile thinking and development if you're in technology, customer experience, data visualization. These are not just for techies or very niche people. These are relevant for anyone going into business or science. So I think if you separate those three, learnability as the nut of all things, the foundation, and then these foundational competencies, which you need to absolutely build that foundation while in college, and then maybe get some exposure while you're going through. And so to answer your question, there are things people can do. First of all, if you're in college, find out what you can get for free. You probably have discounted or free subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal, maybe The Economist, maybe some other publications. Mm-hmm. Absorb them. If you simply read them, take some time in whatever discipline of your major, be interested in them. You can't help but grow. Find podcasts, find authors, find universities, conferences, SlideShare. Obviously, LinkedIn, you can follow influencers. Medium has come up as a really good fairly unbiased platform. And what's nice about it is, even as a college student, if you read them, if you read these posts and articles, periodically write 500 words and just put it out there. Grimace a little bit because you may not like the first things that you write. Just put them out there. Keep doing that. By the time you graduate, you'll have such a portfolio. That's a key word here, portfolio. Mm-hmm. A word often reserved for an artist. An artist shows their photos. They show their sculptures. They show their architecture. Well, as a professional, a budding professional, your portfolio can be the posts that you've written, the analyses that you've done, reports or graphics, whatever it is. And the fact that you've taken the time to catalog them or organize them or just create them over a period of 1 or 2 or 3 years, think about what that means when that employer looks you up and sees that you have 15 or 20 or 30 posts. And when they read that, they know more about you than if they actually interviewed you, because who you are comes out, and the fact that you've done that. So that stuff's free. It's like digging a well before you're thirsty. Sure. You know, it's going to be there when you need it at job time. Sure. Now, there's an old saying about the best time to plant a tree is years ago. The second best time is right now. Well, don't fret if you're a senior or you're not at school and haven't done this yet. Just start today. A lot of this stuff is still fairly new. Blogging, writing, it comes and goes like a stream. So if you just start trying to have a point of view, it forces you to take a stand on something. It also forces you to think what you know and what you don't know and where you can learn. And if you truly say that you're a practitioner in purchasing or in marketing or in oil and gas or high tech, I ask the question of people, who are the authors that you have, or what are the books on your bookshelf or in your Kindle? What conferences do you either attend or do you follow? Who do you follow on the media? And what frameworks do you look to? For example, a periodic table of elements would be a framework that you'd use for chemistry. Well, what do you use for marketing? What do you use for business consulting? What do you use for purchasing? What do you use for supply chain? If you don't have any answers to those, and some people don't, well, it's time to get busy. And these things make great discussion points in interviews. And plus, you just come across as a person who has something to say because you've been exposed to these things.
And I appreciate the part of blogging as something as viable. It continues to be argumentable. I don't know why, and I understand why, because when you put out a lousy work, you don't really get anything in return. But if you put out something with thought, even if it might be argumentable or controversial, the feedback that you can potentially get just furthers your ability to think more critically.
Yeah, and here's the thing, is it's how you define success. If you define success as having a number of a million pop up next to your name, that those people read you or saw you or somehow you had all this money flowing to you, then yeah, you might not be successful. But if your definition of success is that you took a little bit of time, you articulated a point of view about a topic, maybe it's about a particular subject matter, applied to a situation, like what is the tsunami in Japan's effect on, or the nuclear accident in Japan's effect on the worldwide supply chains? What is the effect of possible tariffs on automotive purchasing? What is, you can go down the list.
Mm-hmm.
Just write it down. Maybe you don't publish it to anyone. The fact that you put yourself into that mode and articulated a thought, you're already rewiring your brain in a positive way. And if you put it out there, and it's like the artist that says, well, my stuff isn't good enough. You know what? The fact that you're putting anything out there, if it's authentic, you're putting work into it, and you're actually sharing it as a gift. This is an important point. You're sharing your output as a gift to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Someone might make some use of it. It's a liberating, I think, an ennobling thing. And if you get some people viewing it, all the better. If you somehow get benefit, but I think if you start from a mercenary standpoint at the beginning, then you're right. There's all kinds of stress and insecurity. But if you start with a standpoint of it's a gift, you're putting it out there, and it's authentic, there's no downside.
In your view, and of course, you also talk to employers and through the survey that you've done, what are some things that indicate that they appreciate someone's authenticity? And no matter whether they put it in a written article or maybe they've decided to use video as a way to express that.
Well, first of all, I was noticing as a recruiter ourselves, we hire people from the market.
Sure.
We go to a lot of the Tier 1 schools. And I'd recently been asked to take on North American recruiting for all the campus. So we typically recruit about 13 or 14 campuses, but get the UCLAs and USCs and Princetons and Indiana universities in Texas and a variety of schools across the country. And talking with the career counselors or the career center leaders, that was a pretty good view of what they were thinking and how their programs are working. Mm-hmm. And then also with a lot of the students. I also do some adjunct teaching at the University of Texas at Dallas. They'd asked me to put together a program, a curriculum course on critical thinking and developing customer insights to round out the quantitative skills that they were getting in their master's program. So I was noticing what I thought, anecdotally at least, were some gaps. And so I conducted this survey, several thousand people, to see what they valued. First of all, people aren't aware that the business masters passed the educational masters in 2012 as the most popular master's degree in the country, in the U.S. And it's just gone even more popular since then. So it's a multiple, 10, 12 times law degrees, for example. And then if you look at the feedback, a lot of the recruiters, or at least a good amount of them, about a third, say, I'm not sure that these students are really ready to excel in the workforce. It wasn't horrible, but there was enough. And then I think another third was so-so. Only about a third were really excited. Now the students, of course, and the career center people were pretty gung-ho. They thought they were very ready. So you could see there's a little bit of a perception gap there. But if you dig a little deeper, well, what are these skills that people need to be successful? The recruiters thought that professionalism and work ethic were number one, and critical thinking and teamwork communication were pretty solid as well. It's interesting that work ethic was nowhere in the top skills for the ones from the students. Didn't even think about it. You can read into that if you want or not.
Right.
I think for the most part it's about professionalism more so than the stereotypical work ethic. But again, what's your work ethic coming out of college? Maybe it's to get the grade. Maybe it's the project. It's a different kind of work. You can work very hard, and it's to a goal that has been developed over decades, right? To get a grade. Whereas the work ethic or the type of work in the company, it's different. So I think there's some adaptation that has to happen or learning that has to take place. I think employers would love it if that didn't have to happen quite as much. So I think that's also why internships are good. What's also interesting is not just the importance of skills. For example, the students rated leadership as a very high skill, and yet the employers didn't. Now, they think it's important. They just said, you know what, we're not testing for leadership right away. I mean, there are some things like, were you an officer? Were you in sports? Did you excel? But realistically, leadership when you're coming out of school comes from competence at what you're doing. Can you step in and get something done?
Right.
Can you be good at what you're doing? Can you make an impact? And then can you help others and train others? I think that's where leadership starts to really manifest itself. If you focus so much on the academic aspects of it until you get the actual experience, then I think you're skipping the step of competence. And I think that producer leader is like the surgeon. You'd rather have a surgeon as your doctor than the hospital administrator, the paper pusher kind of thing. I think that analogy.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the proficiency in these, there's a bit of a gap as well. I think that the students had a little bit of they did have a higher rating of themselves than the recruiters. And I think part of that is just confirmation bias, because you're going through college and your peer group, those around you, and your grading structure. But I think that critical thinking, creative thinking, these are skills that people, because they hear about them, they think they're already getting them. No one sees the deficiency while you're actually in school. It's not until how it's applied, I think, in the workforce, that maybe the way people are being trained, there could be some additional improvement. Now, there are plenty of colleges who are taking steps. Like I mentioned, the University of Texas at Dallas, I think, has done some phenomenal things about integrating experiential learning and developing insights, using visualization in a business application. Indiana University, the Kelley School of Business, has done some fantastic things there with the MSIS program, what Tony Girth and Bibbin and Vijay Khatri have done up there, with applying a business analytics degree. It's very business focused. And of course, a lot of the elite schools, Stanford and Harvard, some others, have been doing this. But I think too often, those are the colleges that get all the press. What about the 99 or 98% of the other colleges that are good colleges that, with a little bit of this feedback, might add a little more to their curriculum? Or maybe they would add a little more about case thinking or inductive logic, or maybe a little more feedback so that people have that gravitas and have that extra level of critical thinking and communication coming out of school. That was the purpose I had in conducting the survey, because maybe that some feedback could be provided, and maybe it would help a few people recalibrate a little bit their own views of where things are.
So really, what we're talking about is, I think what people really like to see, and what people really like to rely on, are their own experiences. So of course, for a lot of people who are graduating, they got a chance to apply, to use some leadership skill and to use some creative thinking in regards, but they don't get a chance to use the full load because they're behind the books all the time. In your view, do you think that that perhaps when companies are, well, maybe let me just back up a little bit before I even say that, or just ask this question. Are employers finding it a little bit easier if they tested a graduate coming out, or are there specific tests that are being applied when an employer gets someone to apply to a job to see what their level of critical thinking, or is there data that they're using to say that this person knows how, this person doesn't know how, or they're just viewing the application process and they're getting them to the interview and finding out at that particular point?
Schools are making a lot of progress. I think up until a few years ago, I just said, yes, it's the grades and it's a few data points. And after that, it's a lot of just gut feel on the fit. I think people looked at data, in some cases actually applying few are starting to actually apply artificial intelligence or some recognition via Skype interviews, and they're doing some experiments there. I think what it comes down to, though, is to test for critical thinking, especially for consulting project or consulting work or strategy work, quite often a case is used. It's a mini project, essentially. Mm-hmm. And you're under a lot of stress. You don't have a lot of background. And you have to think very quickly. You have to estimate. You have to make decisions. You have to show your work. And so there's a lot of things that are implicit. So it's like a little pilot or proof of concept mm-hmm. of your work. Other ways that you can test for it. You can test for behavioral, but behavioral, I think people are finding that it is not as insightful for how someone thinks. If you're going for programming, for example, you can have a test. Sometimes when we hire more senior people, we'll have them create a presentation, not to test their PowerPoint skills. That's not the issue. It's, can they stand up in front of a group with less than 24 hours notice, having pulled a lot of data in and created a coherent story? I think that's the key word. In most cases, even if you're a graduate, just coming out of undergraduate or bachelor's degree, the ability to take what you have done and tell a story. Mm-hmm. Whether it's about leadership or it's about how you think, how you overcame something, and the ability to craft a set of facts together in an empathetic way to tell something in a compelling manner. I think that is a test, certainly of your EQ, your emotional quotient, mm-hmm. and also your ability to think, certainly maybe a little creatively. I think the critical aspect, you almost have to have a test of some kind, and that's why the case is often used. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that even though some people can roll their eyes saying that's so 1980s or 90s and that's only for a small group of people, no, I think it's good because it tests a different part of your mental muscle, and it forces you to do things like estimation. And when you have a problem statement, for you to think about intelligent questions to ask. And how do you work within a 20-minute or 40-minute window that you have? And how do you show your notes? And there are little things that you can do to convey confidence. Well, those are all professionalism. Those are all examples of you demonstrating things that you couldn't demonstrate if you were simply filling out a rote test.
So an employer is basically looking at the process, not whether or not that person has the right or wrong answer, exact answer, but they want to know how they got there. Is it logical? Does it make sense? And can they communicate that to mm-hmm. me to where I'm convinced that it makes sense?
A classic question could be, how many ping pong balls can fit in the back of a semi-trailer? How many cars go over a specific bridge? How many airplanes are in the sky at any given point? How many? And what happens is you set up the problem, you frame it. And maybe there's a right answer. Maybe there's a generally right answer. To your point, it's how you frame it. It's how you support it. Because quite often your assumptions and how you calculated it are more important than the actual answer. Because think about the business world. It's about people trusting you when you actually give them an answer. Do they act on it? And that's one of the reasons why consultants or folks in strategy typically have these interesting projects, because somebody spends millions or maybe hundreds of millions or billions of dollars based upon what they say. Well, you better have the goods to back it up and show your logic, make it fact-based, make it very analytical. And that, if you talk to someone who's typically been in consulting or strategy versus someone hasn't, that's typically worked in industry, that's one telltale sign usually. Do they operate from a fact base? Do they base all of their decisions on as much information or facts as possible, or do they just give an opinion or intuition? The more that you can do the former, not the latter, mm-hmm. the more gravitas and seniority you'll convey, regardless of whether or not you have the years, which also is a way that for interviews you can really nail them, or any business discussion, to the extent that you can convey those things. Because we're all looking for these visual and verbal, nonverbal cues, because we don't have all the information we need with someone, especially if we're talking to them on the phone or we get a report. So you looked at all the things like, are their words formed well? Is their writing good? Are they making a case? Is it readable? Is it believable? Is it well supported? And can you follow it fairly quickly?
Well, this was very enlightening, and I do appreciate you spending a little time with us to talk about this. If people wanted to engage you in a further conversation or had any questions about our conversation, how can they or how should they contact you?
JeffKavanaugh.net, JeffKavanaugh.net. You can follow me on Twitter at JeffKav, JeffKav. I do have a book coming out here in the next couple of months, probably about mid to late April, maybe early May, that a lot of these skills, after teaching folks for many years, finally wrote these things down, so hopefully can share it with folks. And also, a lot of these newer skills, especially if you're interested in artificial intelligence and design thinking and customer experience, the work we do and our company does, both in research and consulting, Infosys.com. There's a lot of primary research that will be interesting to folks. I think it will also inform about where some of the new technology trends are going. So those are all some ways people can follow.
Cool. Well, thank you, Jeff Kavanaugh, for coming on Voice of Job Seekers, and thank the rest of you for listening in. Hopefully you had some takeaways. There are notes at thevoiceofjobseekers.com if you want to read the show notes and to get a clearer idea. I took some notes for you, at least give you some of the highlights of our talk today. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. Peace in the Valley of Love. We'll see you next week.